Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Gadan. I am the director of our Latin American program here at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Thank you for your interest in this event. Thank you for your interest in Latin America and the Inter-American Development Bank and in the economic recovery and shared prosperity of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you to my colleagues at the Wilson Center for their co-sponsorship and support of this important dialogue. We are thrilled to have the recently elected president of the Inter-American Development Bank, known as the IDB, Mr. Ilan Goldfajn, here with us to talk about his priorities for this important institution and to explore how all of us can support his work and to promote sustainable growth and development throughout the Western Hemisphere. The IDB is the most important multilateral development bank in this region, a source not only of development finance, but critical expertise and technical assistance now for more than 7 decades. The region's projected growth for this year is dismal, meaning the role of the IDB is more essential than ever. As Ilan himself has said, the IDB cannot simply be the amount of resources lent, but whether that amount has the effect we want. And so our conversation today will be about impacts of this institution and how it can address the monumental challenges that the governments of this region face. I'm particularly excited to have Ilan here with us today because the Wilson Center has a long history of collaborating very effectively with the Inter-American Development Bank. Our most recent partnership, which is ongoing, involves path-setting research into Latin America's booming lithium sector, its environmental and social consequences, and its enormous potential for promoting regional growth and knitting together the dynamic battery and electric vehicle industries throughout this hemisphere. So let me thank you for the partnership of the institution and your excellent staff and team. I'd now like to introduce Ambassador Mark Green, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, who will in turn introduce Ilan to this group and our large audience following us online. So again, welcome everyone and thank you, Ambassador Green.
Thank you, Benjamin, and let me add my warm welcome to everyone who is here. You know, the Wilson Center is a unique institution in this town. We are congressionally chartered, we are scholarship-driven, and we're fiercely independent and nonpartisan. Our status also gives us a higher obligation, an obligation to not simply duplicate what others do, but to focus on what's most important. Those topics and issues that are likely to shape American leadership and American relationships on the world stage. All of that makes this the perfect place to host this important discussion with the new president of the IDB. In my time leading USAID, I learned very quickly how important a partner the IDB can be. And these days, as Benjamin just said, that's never been more true or more important. Latin America and the Caribbean, our vitally important neighbors, face significant challenges as they seek to emerge from a decade of slow growth and the economic and social fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Those challenges have put enormous pressure on the region's leaders, pressure to address inequality, pressure to improve the quality of public services, and to do so urgently, despite the scarce resources. Thankfully, this region can turn to the IDB with its promising new president, Ilan Goldfajn. Prior to the IDB, Ilan served as the director of the Western Hemisphere Department at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and before that as president of Brazil's central bank. He was elected president of the IDB last November. Most in the U.S. don't realize that the IDB is the leading source of development financing for Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2021 alone, the IDB and its private sector arm, IDB Invest, approved more than $23 billion in projects, a record for that institution. That included funding for the region's energy transition and to strengthen regional supply chains. Given the region's daunting challenges and promising opportunities, as well as the IDB's significant capabilities, I am thrilled to welcome Ilan to the Wilson Center at the very start of his presidency. We look forward to learning more about his vision for the IDB. We look forward to hearing about his strategies for promoting economic recovery improving the region's competitiveness, and deepening economic ties between the U.S. and our friends and partners in the Latin America and Caribbean region. In other words, we're eager to learn more, and we're eager to work together. Welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador Green. Thank you, Ilan. I want to start directly where Ambassador Green concluded his remarks, which is the immense challenges facing Latin America and the Caribbean that you've inherited now in this role and that has put an even greater focus on your leadership. I think those who are participating in this know well, but it's worth highlighting the region's high inflation, including high food and energy prices, its low growth, its high unemployment, and the enormous debt hangover from the pandemic, which hit Latin America and the Caribbean much harder than most other regions in terms of economic, public health, and social consequences. I wonder, in that situation, coupled with the political uncertainties in the region, which have limited investment, what is the challenge you're facing in your role? What is the sense of urgency you bring to the presidency of this essential institution?
Well, thank you. Thank you all for the privilege to be here. I would like to thank Ambassador Green and you, Benjamin, for being here, inviting me, and all of you here in person, but also in looking and hearing us from other places. You mentioned some challenges. I think we have challenges that are economic challenges, which are, I will call it short run. Short run meaning a few years from the pandemic, from the Russia invasion of Ukraine, that had led to food prices to go up, which meant that food insecurity has increased. Also meant that poverty has increased after several years where there were quite a bit of improvement. We're seeing a reversal. Inequality has worsened, and we have scars coming from the pandemic. Education, we have kids out of school, and that has long-term. We had kids out of school, and that means that we have long-term effects of that. We're now having inflation, which is not only food, but mainly food. So all of these are issues that we are facing now. But there are also challenges that come from structural issues that were before the pandemic and that continue, even when we are leaving the pandemic after 2 or 3 years. And I call it a triple challenge. The first challenge is that societies are demanding better public goods, better social indicators. They now want to have better health systems. They have experienced during the pandemics the stress of the health systems. They want to have transportation, and they don't want to spend hours from their house to their work. They are not accepting poverty increasing. They don't want to see the region having more inequality than a lot of regions in the world. And when they talk about equity, it's not only income inequality, that they care about gender inequality, they care about diversity, they care about climate. They want a sustainable future for their kids, for their grandchildren. So there is quite a demand for changes that the societies in the region are asking. How do we know that? Because we have seen this explicitly, either in the democratic changes through elections, or we have seen it also on the streets with demonstrations in a lot of countries just in the last 5 years. Think about it, how many we have seen. So authorities are now having to face these demands, and they promise to solve them. But do they have the resources to do that? They will try to find, but we now have larger debts because of the pandemic. The overall debt in Latin America and the Caribbean is around, it was 58% before the pandemic, already high. It has now reached 70%, improved a little bit to 64, 65%. So relatively high debts, not enough fiscal resources. So you have a lot of promises, not enough resources. So you may say, why don't you create the resources? And the problem is that Latin America and Caribbean have not been the places where growth has been strong compared to other regions. So we used to call lost decades because of the low growth. But we had quite a bit of low growth over the years. So the challenge is social needs with not enough resources, and you have not been able to create the resources over time. So the challenge for the IDB is to help in those three dimensions. In how do we solve the social, how do we help the region solve the social issues, the urgent ones, but not only the urgent ones. How do we invest in infrastructure and others to create the opportunities and growth? And how do we help institutions in the region to use the resources in a more effective way, because you don't have enough?
So I'd love to turn to less dreary subjects and opportunities in the region to restart economic growth, to address these issues through more dynamic economies throughout. One of the apparently most promising opportunities relates to the reorganization of global supply chains, sometimes referred to as nearshoring or friendshoring, to refer to large multinational companies moving closer to markets such as the United States and toward countries that share various values, including those that you've mentioned, environmental protection, democratic institutions. I think there's disagreements about the scale and pace of that and inevitability of that transformation, and questions as to whether the geography is compelling enough on its own, or whether institutions like the IDB can play an essential role in creating a better investment climate through technical assistance, but also investments in critical infrastructure, so that companies can actually move operations and expand throughout the Americas, serving any number of public policy objectives in the United States and throughout the region. I guess my question for you first is analytically, is this a real trend? Is it happening anyway? And should the IDB and its sister institutions be accelerating that trend through strategic investments?
So I think the IDB and other multilateral institutions are the place to think about regional integration in the Latin America and Caribbean. The mandate of the IDB is look regionally. So I think the comparative advantage relative to national governments is with the international institutions. We can think broadly about the region. How do we integrate? And integration is more than just trade integration, which is very important, but is also integration in terms of infrastructure. The other day I was talking with some private companies that were doing electricity or transmission between one country and the other. And that's very important, because if you have transmission, you can diversify your electricity, your energy. But we also have projects, infrastructure projects that go from one country to the other, sometimes to the sea, sometimes to the other places. It is not easy to find the resources, develop the good projects, but it's even more challenging to do the two of them between countries. So I think we need to think regional. we need to think how to integrate. And that's clearly something that IDB and other international organizations should do. You asked me if this is a trend. I believe that more and more, because of our closeness in terms of digital, in terms of media, and we are increasingly together. And I believe that with the mandate of integrating Latin America, Caribbean, we will contribute with that.
Another dynamic sector in a region that's perhaps better known for its commodity-dependent economies is the digital sector and digital innovation. Over the course of the pandemic, this region that had been a slow adopter of a lot of digital technologies became very much online by necessity. And that includes governments themselves, medium and small enterprises. We've realized many of the benefits from telemedicine to connecting small businesses to transparency in government, financial technologies, you name it. That said, it seems like there's several barriers to the continued expansion of that trend in Latin America. Maybe the two that I would ask you to address is the digital workforce in the region. So a scarcity of workers who are trained to be able to staff companies that are growing at really extraordinary rates, but maybe even more so the what we think of as the digital divide. Right? This is just a lack of accessibility of the internet and digital tools to a very large percentage, perhaps even over a third of the region. What's the role of multilateral development banks, particularly what's the role of the IDB in recognizing and contributing to the trend of the digital transformation in Latin America? And why is that a worthwhile target? It seems to be a priority of yours and your leadership.
Two reasons. One is inclusion. There's no way to include everybody, to reduce poverty, to have education reaching everybody, to have the health system reaching everybody if they're not connected somehow. I have been in contact with a lot of companies. Some of them are partners of the IDB Lab. The IDB Lab is the place where the IDB finances startups. Quite a lot of them use technology. A lot of them are based on digital. And when you hear about them, you are sometimes amazed over the ideas. But at the same time, you know that if there is this digital the division that you mentioned is an issue, because if they are not connected, how are you going to actually get the innovations? How are you going to reach them? So that's quite important. I tend to joke that I had previous lives. In my previous lives, I worked with financial inclusion and instant payments, and one of the efforts were to have everybody very fast, cheap way of transacting. And that actually has been quite an improvement in the last few years. So that was actually successful. But you need people to be connected. Because if they are not connected, they are not going to be able to do that. So what an IDB can do? Put the infrastructure. Help look at where we have the connectivity. Where we can do it. Because if you put connectivity, the rest is coming together, including with the IDB Lab and the IDB Invest. The IDB Invest is the private sector arm of the IDB, which finances companies that partner with the IDB, again, to help have development impact. So, yes, there's quite a bit of a role, and I think this is essential. The other reason, beyond inclusion, is growth. We just mentioned last decades. To grow, you need productivity growth. For productivity growth, you need innovation. For innovation, I see increasingly digital transformation. So if we are going to somehow jumpstart growth in Latin America, it will have to come partly, or a good part, from connectivity, from digital transformation.
looking at other potential motors of economic recovery, we thought following the tragic invasion of Ukraine that global food scarcity and global food insecurity would be an engine of growth throughout the Americas. The Americas is already a breadbasket of the world with very sophisticated agricultural sectors in places like Argentina and Brazil. Instead, we've seen food insecurity worsen within this very region. We've seen not only poverty increase, but the cost of food make it inaccessible for many families to obtain the nutrition necessary. There's reasons for that. Climate change has not been helpful. There have been droughts in South America that have been devastating to farmers. We've also seen fertilizer scarcity and the expense of fertilizer make it difficult for farmers to take advantage of this opportunity. I wonder, I've heard you speak very optimistically about the ability of the Americas to even do more than be the leader right now in feeding the world, but to maybe even double production. Can you take me from this moment and the challenges I've laid out to the moment where this region is addressing food scarcity at a much greater scale even?
I'm usually not accused to be optimistic, but I think there is a vision for the region where the region could continue to be the food supplier of the world. Now, 40% of global food trade comes from the region. As I mentioned to you before, the region produces food for 1.3 billion people. That's double its population. And if you do the calculations of where, if you have the infrastructure, if you deal with transportation, if you give the right incentives, you can actually be able in a couple of decades to feed almost 10 billion people. So yes, there is a vision where the region can be part of the solution. But you're also right that the region is not uniform. There's quite a bit of heterogeneity. We have small and also island states where they basically import everything, all their food, all their energy. And when you have a pandemic followed by a huge increase in prices, both of fuel, but also of food, this is a major issue because we know that the proportion of income spent by the poor on food is much larger. So it's a distributional issue. Who suffers more from food inflation? Who suffered more in Latin America and Caribbean from the invasion of Ukraine? Were the poor. So yes, we had quite a bit of more food insecurity increasing. And despite the fact that a good part of the production is in Latin America of the food, does not mean that we were able to distribute it fairly and be able to solve the food insecurity issues across the region. So in addition to be part of the global solution, the region has to solve its own food insecurity issues at the same time.
Another area where I'll see if I can push you toward optimism would be energy, and particularly renewable energy. Studies from institutions like your own have showed the extraordinary potential of Latin America to produce renewable energy and perhaps to use it to produce green hydrogen. I wonder, again, how the region can create an investment climate where this can play a bigger role on a global level. Already, it is beyond most other regions in the use of renewable energy internally, and I think in terms of making its contributions to solve the climate crisis. So I think, it certainly has met those requirements. But now we're talking about whether it can play a role in providing energy for other regions that are not blessed with these opportunities for solar and wind and other renewable sources. So how do we drive that investment into Latin America? How do we make sure that the IDB is providing the right resources, creating the right climate, so that companies which increasingly are seeking this for their own production in the region, and so there's the ability even to export this energy elsewhere, perhaps again through green hydrogen. So where do you see the IDB playing a role in the energy transition?
I think the IDB can help the region become part of the solution in terms of energy too. I think it could be the place where we produce clean energy to the world. And that's a vision. I'm not sure if it's an optimism, but that's a vision of where we can get. And I'm saying it because today, while the world average of renewable energy is around 14%, in Latin America and the Caribbean, 30%. So it's double what the world average is. When you look at, you mentioned the study on lithium, and I'm very glad to partner on studies and other areas where the center is partnering with IDB, and I hope we continue to do so. But looking at lithium, the region has two-thirds of the world lithium. And lithium is crucial to the green transition. And green transition is the future. So that's why I think we are part of the solution. The region is part of the solution.
If we could dwell on lithium just for a moment, as you point out, it's been a priority for us here at the Wilson Center to drive greater attention and investment and to strengthen the supply chains for these green technologies. A great national interest in the United States, and I think a hemispheric opportunity. However, when you talk to governments in the region, their interest doesn't end with the production of lithium and lithium carbonate, but rather there's an interest in downstream industries, in having battery manufacturing and the development and production of electric vehicles, usually thought of as a national project, even without regional coordination. For a variety of reasons, as an economist, there may not be natural comparative advantages for all of the countries that want to do so to succeed in industrializing that and other critical minerals like copper. What's your impression of whether it is realistic to move up the value chain in some of these critical minerals and the industries that depend upon them? And if so, how might the IDB help promote the development of those industries either at a national level or a regional level?
So when they're thinking about downstreaming, and the basically objective is to add value. And the idea of adding value is generating more income, and you generate more income means more growth. And then you have the resources that I was talking about here, where you can provide better services, public services. So that's the end goal. We can have a debate whether in some places you'll generate this value added, whether you can actually generate more resources. But I think the idea of being able to add value, to look for places where you can add value is novel. But it's not an easy task. It's not just say, well, this is where we're going to go, and just because some other place in the world has done it, that's exactly where we need to go. We need to think where you have the comparative advantage. Where are you going to use the resources in an effective way? And I have mentioned before that effectiveness is crucial to be able to invest in places where you're going to add more value. So that seems to be a very crucial part of deciding where you should put your resource investment, energy, talent. We need to find places. So in principle, we have the same objective, all of us, to add value, but we need to be very objective of where we are more effective.
Manu, if you'll permit me to press you on the issue just a bit more. Yeah. During the boom period, the commodity super cycle in the Americas, as you know, there was a concern, even in a relatively prosperous moment where the regional middle class was growing, that the region was deindustrializing, that too much labor and capital were moving to the commodity industries and away from more dynamic sectors that might produce rising incomes throughout the region and more favorable terms of trade. So even moving away from lithium, copper, and those particular industries, should we be worried about industrial development in the Americas, or should we seize opportunities from energy scarcity and food insecurity and allow those sectors which are the most competitive to thrive?
So I am concerned about what the IDB should be doing, the main mandate. I'm concerned about the improving lives of people, and we need to concentrate in the best way to improve the lives of the people. So when I look at the priorities we are facing, I see we need to put the resources for the social issues, social protection. How are we going to provide education, the health systems? We need to provide resources for infrastructure. So both physical, and we talk about digital. We talk about regional integration. And finally, we need to provide a response to the climate change, but not only mitigation, but also adaptation, because part of the region now is facing more natural events. If you look at Central America, you look at the Caribbean, they're having now natural disasters that they used to happen every 10 years. Now it's happening every 3 years. Sometimes it has the cost of 25% of GDP, sometimes 50% of GDP. That's things that we need to care. So the answer to you, whether it's industrial policy, whether not, those are the priorities. We are going directly to the source to improve lives where they need to be there.
I'm glad earlier in our conversation you emphasized the diversity, the heterogeneity in the Americas. A lot of the engines of growth we've talked about, and I think they're genuine opportunities, relate to South America above all. The capacity to ramp up food production, energy as well, critical minerals, much of that is in South America. The nearshoring opportunities, I think we could discuss as obvious opportunities in the Caribbean and Central America. But I want to focus on Central America, and particularly Northern Central America, if I could. As you could imagine, not exclusively because of the migration challenges, but in large part because of that, it has become a priority for the United States government at the moment to solve what are often referred to as the root causes of the migration out from places like Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. And a lot of times the discussions turn to the need for greater investment and look at the ways institutions, including multilateral development banks, could provide infrastructure that would make the investment climate more attractive to foreign investors, including U.S. investors, and thereby create economic opportunity that would encourage families to remain in their communities and not to risk the uncertainties and the dangers of migrating. I want to ask you that question and whether you think it's feasible given the challenges to investors right now, but also the governance question, which is perhaps even more complex, which is that in parts of Central America, including in Northern Central America, there is a perception that governance is not adequate to solving the development challenges. And so foreign investment, assistance from international institutions will never be sufficient until there's a higher quality of governance in those countries. So if you could speak about Central America, its unique challenges and the role the IDB could play in complementing what I think is a renewed effort in the United States to solve, again, the root causes of this migration crisis.
So when we talk about Central America, in particular the Northern Triangle, we're talking about generating the right environment, the right public services for the people in the region, so that their income is enough, where the poverty diminishes, where they feel secure, where more than that, they actually have jobs, where the skills are adequate. And that's the way you can root people to their communities. If they don't have enough sanitation, if they don't feel that they're protected, if they feel that their health services is lacking, you're not going to root them in the community. So there is an effort, I understand, from governments, from civil society, from the private sector, to try to address the root causes, which I just described. And those are jobs, skills, and in our case, also infrastructure. If we provide infrastructure in these places, that will make it easier for private sector to come in and to provide other type of services. Now, there's usually chicken and egg. You mentioned in your question how can the private sector invest if there are not enough governance and institutions? And so maybe private sector or public sector even think that, well, let's just wait for that before we actually invest or we enter. But you do need the investment, you need the scale to actually give the incentives for governance and changes in institution. So it is exactly where we cannot just wait for the right conditions. We need to create the conditions. And this is part of where the public sector have an important role, is to provide the basic technical assistance so that you provide the right governance and the business environment and rule of law so that the private sector feels that they can partner.
We're putting a lot of responsibility on your lap, Ilan, and on the Inter-American Development Bank to solve very complex problems and to solve them urgently. And I want to talk about whether you have the resources to do so. It's a large institution. You have more than 2,000 employees. You've been able to lend more than $20 billion in the really critical period during and now in this somewhat post-pandemic era. But there are a lot of voices, including in Washington, who believe you need far greater resources to play the role we'd like you to play. There have been talks of another recapitalization of the IDB to provide more than $80 billion in fresh capital that would increase significantly your annual lending. I wonder if you could talk about what that would mean for you, what the right figure would be for recapitalization, whether conditions are correct in the United States Congress right now, how much, if at all, you could do personally in trying to win allies for that vision. Again, given all of the responsibility we've now said falls to you and your presidency of this bank at this moment.
Let me tell you that there are different tracks. I think we have been talking a lot about mobilizing private sector, catalyzing. We do have a private sector arm at the IDB Invest. We have a growth plan for the IDB Lab, and I think these are plans that are, I think, can continue and be deployed faster. But also, we need to think about first on the effectiveness we were talking. Are we using the capital that's already there in the best way possible? Is the dollars that are deployed are used efficiently? And when you tackle that, even if you don't change completely, but you start changing in the right direction, it is easier to attract more capital, public, but then afterwards also private. So the answer to you is that there are different tracks, and we need first to be sure that we're using the current capital in the best way possible, and this will be the basis for future growth.
One of the challenges that many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, including maybe particularly in the Caribbean, where the relatively high per capita income makes the government ineligible for certain types of United States and multilateral financing. This is true in places like Chile and Uruguay in South America. This has become increasingly well known and a great frustration because it inhibits strategic investments in, you could say in renewable energy production, for example, or in strengthening supply chains. It's sometimes seen as inhibiting the United States to play a role in great power competition, which we can discuss later in our conversation. What's your vision for supporting middle-income countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, whether there's enough financing available, and if not, who are the constellation of international actors who could rethink limitations on financing middle-income countries?
I think there are ways to deal with the financing. First, there are innovative instruments where you can have blended blended financing, blending traditional financing with some concessional resources, so that you get lower financing for where you want to give incentives. So yes, we can share that. You can also think about instruments where you give incentives to reaching some targets. For example, you have climate or decarbonization targets. And if you reach those targets, you get a better conditions, financial conditions. So you have the additional incentives of reaching the target, so that if you reach the target, your cost of borrowing goes down. And there are other ways of thinking about financing for the middle income, where people say the risk, you take out the risk from some of the private sector investment, but it's not that you de-risk, is that the risk is there. It's just that you, in a smart way, redistribute the risk, where the public sector can have some part of the risk that sometimes markets are not comfortable with that risk, maybe because it's too long term, maybe the business environment, so that you provide some of this distribution of risk with the public sector enters with guarantees, where it absorbs more junior debt relative to senior debt. So there are ways to do it so that the public sector enters with some redistribution of the risk, so that the private sector can enter more, so that you get more financing to middle income.
I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to reward our in-person audience who risked traveling on a rainy day in Washington to ask some questions as well. I was glad you've brought up a couple of times climate issues and resilience issues in the Americas. It's become fashionable to talk about building back better, to look at economic recovery, but in a way that's sensitive to the protection of biodiversity, to slowing and reversing deforestation, to protecting marine resources from overfishing, and to reducing emissions. Maybe we can't address all of that, so why don't we go to Amazon and deforestation, given its importance to the global fight against climate change, and given the opportunities from a different constellation of political actors now in the Americas. I bring it up because you've emphasized repeatedly the idea of the IDB as catalyzing coordination within the region and thinking of things not only at a national level. What's your approach to making sure that the growth that we seek to catalyze now doesn't have the environmental impacts that previous types of economic projects have had in this region, causing what I think is a clear biodiversity crisis throughout the Americas?
So there are quite a bit of initiatives, especially in the Amazon, where you care about the biodiversity. But this goes way beyond paying for preservation. You actually need to engage the communities, so that you give them livelihood, where their trees, which are standing, have more value than when they are cut, in the sense that they believe that they're going to get more value from preserving the biodiversity than what they had done in the past. So engaging the communities, engaging in the local municipalities, talking to businesses, having very clear targets. And last but not least, we talk about regional integration. The Amazon is not one country. The Amazon is a combination of several countries. And all of them care about the Amazon. All of them now are in the drive to protect the Amazon. But here is the IDB saying, well, let's do it together. Let's join efforts. We have the resources. We can partner with other governments. We can partner with philanthropic institutions, with civil societies, to help you have a joint effort for a global, not only a regional, but a global public good.
And please count on us as a partner as well. Our Brazil Institute is deeply committed to these issues. We've worked with the Colombian government on these issues as well, including on marine protection and other environmental challenges in the region. So please do count on us. Let me invite your questions. Please join our conversation here.
Welby Lehman with Walmart. Could the bank see within the infrastructure and the I appreciated your discussion actually of the root causes and how the interplay between corruption and inclusive economic opportunity works. So could the bank see in both its infrastructure work and its root causes work an opportunity to really elevate the priority of digitalization of those regulatory systems that are simultaneously historically plagued by corruption, thereby generating distrust and also frustration, and are potentially the authorizers of exactly the actions that business and others are asked to take, put investment where it's not. And if so, we have always believed that the bank's done cutting-edge, best-in-class work on the government procurement digitalization agenda, but not so much on the digitalization of licensing and permitting systems, which are the systems that would allow the private sector to play its own role in the infrastructure development. So could that licensing and permitting opportunity be a prioritized opportunity to respond to the worldview that you've laid out today?
Excellent. Roni.
Thank you very much. My name is Raoni Rajão. I'm a fellow here and soon to be director of deforestation control policies at the Ministry of Environment. Thanks for the remarks on the Amazon. Very interesting indeed. It's good to see that it has a high priority. And I was wondering because last year, actually a couple of years ago, the previous government of Brazil have asked the Inter-American Development Bank to create a fund to support actions in the Amazon. And I was wondering if there is a future of that fund and what are the plans in relation to that. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. All of them very interesting and very to the point. On the question on financing local governments relatively to federal governments, I believe the IDB should continue to finance local governments. It has been doing it in several countries, and I think we need to be decentralized even more. There are quite a bit of debates on how to do it. Do you need government guarantees for local financing? So that's a big debate where you are going to ask for the federal government to guarantee the local, or you're going to be able to finance directly. This is a discussion. So the discussion is not whether you're going to finance local governments because you are already doing it, but how are you going to do it? Are you going to ask for guarantees or not? Are you comfortable with the risk? So I think this is the debate we need to have. There was also a question on diversity. I think diversity is quite important, and we believe at the IDB that we need to care about gender, diversity, and inclusion, the famous GDI. And I think we need to elevate this issue at the IDB to be something that is transversal, which means that it's not an issue just for human resources, or it's not an issue just for our work in the field. It's something that addresses both internal issues but also our policies for the country. So yes, I think diversity is quite relevant. On the procurement, I think we have. I think the IDB has done, and one of the questions he actually acknowledged that in the procurement there was quite a bit of advances on both on digitalization, but also in making sure that in the procurement you are doing the right job, the right things. Sometimes people complain about the agility, which they have their right reasons. We need to be more agile, but we also have to care that you have the right procurement, you are respecting rule of law. So that's very, very important. And that brings me to the question whether we can, in terms of infrastructure, should we be giving a lot of attention to digitalization? And the answer is yes. I think that's the future. It doesn't mean that we are not going to finance physical infrastructure. It means that digital is increasingly important. And in terms of digitalization and rule of law, you're right that procurement has been improving. And I want to look at licenses and permits. I want to look at it because this is something you mentioned that I want to see how are we doing. So allow me to look. I mean, I've just been there for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, but it's very good to have here because I get your perspectives, which are helping me to go back and say, well, how are we doing in terms of licenses and permitting? So thank you for that.
And I believe we had one other question about the Amazon
Or
fund.
the Amazon.
Yes.
So whether the Amazon is, there is, luckily, the Amazon initiative is there. It already has, for technical assistance, already have $20 million. It's up and running. We have efforts there in several areas in terms of different funds. What we need now is to basically have, in my view, an umbrella which put all these efforts together, not only at IDB, but there are efforts here, efforts there. Let's just work together in one umbrella so that we can be able to deliver better results.
Final questions. We have 2 here, and then I have one of my own. Okay, we have 3. I'll ask a brief one of my own, and then we'll conclude. I think Kezia, right? There we go. Thanks, Patricia.
Hi, again, I'm Kezia McKegg with McClarty Associates. I just wanted to say I think you've already done a lot in your short tenure to improve the morale of the staff of the IDB, much needed, so congratulations. My question is about a recently launched initiative by the U.S. government, the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity. Frankly, there's a lot of skepticism in the private sector about the substance of the agreement. It's not a trade agreement, but it's a priority for the Biden administration. The first pillar of that partnership with 11 other countries in the region is about reforming multilateral development banks. Is there anything you can tell us about how you're envisioning a reform agenda at the IDB and whether you're engaging with the Biden administration about this? Thank you.
Thank you. Here in the second row.
Thank you. Well, thank you. My name is Fernando Loureiro from Intel Corporation. My question is back to the nearshoring, offshoring opportunity. The IDB is about to release this report on the opportunities for the region. We as a company, of course, we are super interested. We are doing a lot of efforts from our own, trying to attract our partners from everywhere to the region, to the Western Hemisphere. Of course, Mexico, Latin America, Brazil, seem to have a good opportunities right there. With the massive investment in capacity manufacturing that some of companies like Intel are doing in the US, it opens a lot of opportunities in packaging, advanced packaging, design, so on and so forth, right? So we are doing some efforts like this, right? Promoting countries like Mexico, federal government, state governments to pitch the opportunities for our partners in Taiwan, Korea, Japan, so on and so forth. So my question is, what else we can do and how we can collaborate with a IDB in the same ideas? What would be possible in this arena? Thank you.
Excellent. I think in the middle here.
Thank you. Thank you for the timely and important conversation. Lisi Docanto with APCOR Worldwide. Can you talk about how the role that the bank can and should play with what's going on now in Haiti the emergent situation there regionally for the Dominican Republic and the surrounding countries. Thank you.
Excellent. And because those weren't complex enough, with 5 minutes to go, I'll add the question about the changing role of China in the Americas. Not only the changing geopolitics and increasing concern in Washington about the role China is playing in the region, but also its changing approach to the region, with much less state-to-state lending, but still an interest in acquiring infrastructure, the diversifying of the sectors that China is playing in the Americas. So I'll add that to your list as well for our last 5 minutes. Thanks, Ilan.
So it's 5 minutes. I'll have to be very short in each answer. On the morale, yes, I hope to continue to help the morale of the IDB, but also in the region. The more I can do, the better. On the reform of the development banks, a lot of our initiatives are aligned. When we talk about effectiveness, it's important when we talk about being able to have regional views instead of only country views. When we talk about attracting, mobilizing, catalyzing private sector, they are all issues that are part of I will believe, the modernization of the institution. So I think we are quite aligned in the right track. On the issue of Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the region. It's one of our few fragile countries because the rest are more middle income. And I think we have an obligation to look carefully at the ones that are more vulnerable in the region. Sometimes the most vulnerable, also the most difficult to help because of the security, because of the institutions, because of all what we have just said here. But that doesn't mean that you should not continue to do the effort and try to help the most vulnerable in the region. How can companies help the IDB? I think we have been engaging with companies. Take the IDB Invest. When it enters, it partners with companies. It asks companies, what are you doing? Can you help us in generating this investment or this financing? Sometimes we have platforms where companies share their experiences, and that in that way they only also bring more companies to the region. So that's the way I believe we can partner, and if we do it in the right way, we can be more integrated, and the IDB will be quite engaged in that. The region has quite a bit of trade with several nations, and I think they will continue to do so. It is important to be able to trade and respect what countries are doing, and also at the IDB, as we mentioned here, we need to have basic values, rule of law. We talk about democratic, so all of them is very important for us. We touch about very specific issues, procurement, but the general theme is democratic values, rule of law. So all of these is basic values that allow us to do the rest.
Excellent. Please join me in thanking Ilan Goldfajn, President of the Inter-American Development Bank, for his generous participation in this conversation. You can imagine he has an immensely challenging schedule. Thank you, Ilan, for being here, for your excellent team. Thank you to my colleagues at the WABA Institute for Strategic Competition, in the Mexico Institute, the Brazil Institute, the Latin American program that I lead. Thank you, everyone, for your help. Thank you for being here again on a rainy afternoon. Thank you, everyone online who joined us for this important conversation.